What happens when a 78-year-old grandmother reveals a secret she's kept for 60 years on live television? Stop the tape. Stop it right now. Dr. Phil's voice cut through the studio like a knife. In his 21 years of hosting, he had never stopped a taping mid-show. But as Margaret Henderson sat in that chair, clutching a yellowed envelope with trembling hands, tears streaming down her weathered face, something in that moment demanded he break every protocol. What happened in the next 7 minutes would become the most watched Dr. Phil episode in history. The studio audience sat frozen, collectively holding their breath. The cameras kept rolling even as Dr. Phil signaled to cut. Margaret's granddaughter, Stephanie, stood paralyzed stage left, her hand covering her mouth in shock. "Margaret," Dr. Phil said softly, kneeling beside her chair in a gesture producers had never seen him make before. "You don't have to do this here. We can go backstage. We can stop right now." But Margaret shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "No. I've been silent for 60 years. If I stop now, I'll never find the courage again." Nobody in that studio, not the crew, not the audience, not even Dr. Phil himself, was prepared for what she was about to reveal. 3 hours earlier, Margaret had arrived at the Paramount lot with her granddaughter Stephanie. The show's producers had reached out after Stephanie submitted a desperate request. Her grandmother had been having nightmares for months, waking up screaming, calling out names no one recognized. In the pre-interview room, Margaret seemed composed, deflecting deeper inquiries with practiced ease. But when asked about the envelope she clutched everywhere, her hands started to shake. The taping began normally. Dr. Phil walked onto the stage to applause. "Today," he began, "we're going to talk about family secrets and the burden they place on the people who carry them." Margaret and Stephanie took their seats. The studio lights were bright but not harsh. Dr. Phil started gently. "Margaret, Stephanie tells me you've been having nightmares. Can you tell me what you see in these dreams?" "Just old memories, Dr. Phil. Things from a long time ago." "What kind of memories?" "War memories. I was young during the war." "World War II?" "Yes." Dr. Phil continued. "And these nightmares, are they about things you saw?" Margaret's grip tightened on the envelope. "Things I did." The first crack in her armor. Dr. Phil caught it immediately. His posture changed, his voice dropped an octave. "Things you did? Can you tell me about that?" Margaret looked at Stephanie, then at the audience, then back to Dr. Phil. For a moment, it seemed like she might retreat into silence. Then she spoke. "I wasn't always Margaret Henderson. That's not the name I was born with." The studio went quiet. This wasn't in the pre-interview notes. "What was your name?" "Dr. Phil asked. "Margaret Schneider. I was born in Dresden, Germany, in 1947. Dr. Phil's expression shifted. He leaned forward. "You were born in Dresden. After the war. 2 years after the bombing. My mother, she survived the firestorm." The audience was completely silent now. Even the crew had stopped their usual mid-show movements. "And this envelope?" Dr. Phil gestured to the yellowed paper in her hands. "What's in there, Margaret?" She looked down at it, her fingers tracing its edges. "Letters. From my mother. She wrote them before she died, but I couldn't read them. Not for 60 years. "Why not?" "Because they're written in German, and I swore I would never speak that language again." The weight of that statement hung in the air. Stephanie gasped audibly. She'd never known her grandmother spoke German. Margaret had been so thoroughly American for so long that even her accent had disappeared. "Dr. Phil stood up, his mind racing. This was deeper than anyone had anticipated. "Margaret, why did you make that vow?" She was crying now, steady tears running down her face. "Because of what I did. Because of who I was." "Who were you?" The pause felt like an eternity. The cameras captured every second. Later, editors would note that 12 seconds passed, an eon in television time, before Margaret spoke again. "I was 6 years old when the American soldiers came." My mother was starving, trying to feed me and my baby brother. The city was destroyed. There was no food. No water. Nothing. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Margaret's voice grew stronger, as if releasing decades of pressure. An American soldier found us in the rubble. He could have walked past. Most did. But he stopped. His name was James Henderson. He was from Texas. Dr. Phil sat back down, giving her space but staying close. He helped you. He saved us. He brought food, water, blankets. He came back every day for 3 weeks. My mother, she fell in love with him. I know that sounds impossible, but it's not impossible, Dr. Phil interjected gently. Humanity finds a way even in the darkest times. He wanted to take us to America. He promised to marry my mother, to adopt me and my brother. It would take time, paperwork, but he promised. The audience was leaning forward, completely absorbed. And then? Margaret's voice broke. Then the telegram came. James had been reassigned. He was being sent to Korea. He left us his address, promised to write, promised to come back. Did he? He did write. For 2 years letters came. My mother kept them all. She taught herself English reading his words. She taught me too. We waited. And then the letters stopped. The studio was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning hum. My mother never gave up hope. Even when years passed. Even when we had nothing. She'd read those old letters to us every night. He's coming back, she'd say. James is coming back. Dr. Phil's voice was barely above a whisper. But he didn't. He did. In 1959. 12 years later. The audience gasped. Several women were openly crying now. He came back to Dresden looking for us. But by then, Margaret's voice failed completely. What happened, Margaret? Dr. Phil's hand reached out, not quite touching her but offering support through proximity alone. By then, my mother was gone. She died of tuberculosis in 1956. My brother had been adopted by a German family. And she couldn't continue. Dr. Phil made a decision that would define this moment. Stop the tape, he said firmly, standing up and gesturing to the control booth. Stop it right now. The technical director's voice came through. Dr. Phil, we can't just... I don't care about protocol right now. Stop. The tape. The red recording lights blinked off. The audience stirred, confused. This had never happened before. Dr. Phil turned to his producers, his voice commanding but not angry. Get me a German translator. Now. And bring a private room. Nobody follows us. Nobody. He turned to Margaret. You don't have to perform your pain for anyone. Let's go somewhere private, and let's read those letters together. Margaret's face crumpled in gratitude. You would do that? Margaret, that's why I'm here. What nobody watching knew was that Dr. Phil himself was fighting back tears. As they moved backstage, Dr. Phil kept his hand lightly on Margaret's shoulder. Stephanie followed, still in shock. The studio audience remained seated, quiet, waiting, understanding they were witnessing something profound. In the private room, a translator arrived within minutes, one of the show's producers who happened to be fluent in German. Margaret opened the envelope with shaking hands. The first letter was dated March 15, 1955. The translator began to read, and Margaret heard her mother's words in English for the first time. My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, I am gone. But I need you to know the truth. James Henderson did come back. He found me in the hospital in 1954. He wanted to take you, to give you the life in America I always dreamed of for you. Margaret's sob was visceral, a sound of 60 years of grief escaping at once. I told him no. I was dying, and I could not bear to tell you goodbye. I was a coward, my darling girl. I sent him away. I told him you were already adopted, that you were happy, that you didn't remember him. I lied because I was too weak to watch you leave me. The translator paused, her own voice breaking. Dr. Phil stood against the wall, his jaw clenched, processing the magnitude of this revelation. He left you his information. He never stopped looking for you. Every year on your birthday, he would write to the Red Cross searching. The address is at the bottom of this letter. Find him, my darling. Find him and forgive me. The second letter was dated March 20th, 1955. I am writing this only days before the end. James came back yesterday. He found the hospital again. He begged me to tell him the truth. And I confessed everything. He cried, Margaret. This strong American soldier cried in my hospital room. Margaret was hyperventilating now. Dr. Phil moved closer, his hand on her shoulder, grounding her. He made me promise to give you these letters. He made me promise to tell you that he never forgot you, that you were the daughter of his heart even though papers said otherwise. He left you his parents' address in Texas. He said the door would always be open. The third letter was the shortest. March 23, 1955. Tomorrow I will be gone. But tonight I need you to know, James Henderson loved you as his own. He wanted to adopt you legally. He wanted to give you his name. The papers are with these letters. He signed them. They only needed your signature when you turned 18. Margaret pulled out a set of aged, official-looking documents. Adoption papers. Legal and binding. Dated 1954. Signed by James Henderson. Never completed. Dr. Phil looked at the documents, then at Margaret, and made the second decision that would define this episode. Margaret, he said quietly, do you want to know if James Henderson is still alive? She looked up at him, hope and terror warring in her eyes. Can you find out? Give me 10 minutes. Dr. Phil walked out of the room and directly to his executive producer. Find James Henderson. Texas. Military records. I don't care what it takes. Find him now. 23 minutes later, they had an answer. Dr. Phil returned to the private room where Margaret was still holding the letters, Stephanie beside her, both women emotionally drained. Margaret, Dr. Phil began, and his voice was gentle but clear. James Henderson died in 2003. He was 79 years old. Margaret's face fell, the last hope extinguishing. But, Dr. Phil continued, pulling out his phone, he never stopped looking for you. And he left something. He showed her the screen. It was an obituary. James Henderson, survived by his wife of 45 years, Susan, and his 3 sons, Michael, David, and Robert. He spoke often of the little girl in Germany he could never find, the daughter he never got to bring home. Margaret read it through tears. He remembered me. More than remembered. Look at this. Dr. Phil showed her another document his team had uncovered. A trust fund, established in 1960 in the name of Margaret Schneider/Margaret Henderson, with specific instructions that it be maintained indefinitely until she was found. He never gave up hope that you'd come forward someday. The fund is still active. His sons have been managing it for 20 years, waiting. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Margaret couldn't speak. The weight of 60 years, the guilt, the loss, the what-ifs, seemed to lift and crash simultaneously. Dr. Phil knelt beside her again. Margaret, you were 6 years old. You couldn't have known. Your mother was dying and made an impossible choice. James understood that. He never blamed you. He spent his whole life hoping you'd find your way home. But I never did, she whispered. You are right now. Those sons of his? They're your brothers in every way that matters. And they want to meet you. Dr. Phil had already made the call. Within 48 hours, Margaret and Stephanie flew to Texas. The 3 Henderson sons, Michael, 72, David, 69, and Robert, 66, met them at the airport. Michael carried a photograph, their father in 1945, young and hopeful, standing in the ruins of Dresden, holding a small German girl on his shoulders. Margaret. The reunion was captured by the Dr. Phil crew, but it wasn't exploitative. It was sacred. These 4 people, connected by a man who never gave up, finally completing a circle 60 years in the making. Robert handed Margaret a box. Dad kept this his whole life. He always said, "When we find Margaret, give her this." Inside was a necklace, a small silver locket. Inside the locket, a photo of 6-year-old Margaret, and a photo of James in his uniform. He carried this through Korea, through his whole life. He wore it under his uniform. Mom knew about it. She understood. Back in the studio, Dr. Phil addressed the camera directly. "This is why we do what we do. Margaret carried 60 years of guilt for a decision she never made. Her mother made a choice out of love and fear. And James Henderson never stopped searching." He looked at the audience. "The lesson isn't about regret. It's about the power of truth. Margaret chose courage over comfort. And because of that, she found her way home." The episode ended with Dr. Phil's signature sign-off. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak your truth, even when it's 60 years old. If you're carrying something too heavy to bear alone, find your envelope. Find your courage. Find your truth. The camera pulled back, Margaret, Stephanie, and the 3 Henderson brothers sitting together on stage, holding hands, a family finally complete. The impact was immediate and massive. The episode garnered 18 million views within 48 hours. Margaret's story became a catalyst for thousands of families to seek their own truths, to open their own long-sealed letters, to find their own lost connections. But for Dr. Phil, the real legacy was simpler. "In 21 years," he said in a later interview, "I've helped a lot of people. But Margaret? She reminded me why I do this. Some secrets don't need to stay buried. Some truths, no matter how painful, need to see the light." Margaret Henderson lived her final years in Texas, surrounded by the family she never knew she had. The trust fund James had maintained was used to establish a scholarship for children of war. On her death in 2031, her obituary read simply, "Margaret Henderson, daughter, grandmother, and finally home." The yellowed envelope and letters are now displayed at the Dr. Phil studio, a testament to the power of courage, truth, and love that refuses to die. And somewhere in Texas, a small headstone sits between 2 graves, James Henderson, 1924 to 2003, and Margaret Henderson, 1947 to 2031. The inscription reads, "Finally together. Finally home."